This is the story of how an Italian immigrant went from a small-time hustler to leading one of the most powerful mafias in the United States. You're watching this channel? Our story begins in Castellamare del Golfo, in the province of Trapani in Sicily, Italy. The town itself was founded on a flat stretch of coastal land that was perfectly suited for growing citrus fruits. In fact, the town was named after the deep-water port where the lemons and oranges were shipped to the rest of Europe. Because of this, Castellamare became known as one of the most important producers of citrus fruits in all of Italy. But by the 1920s, this would change. Like so many other young men from the countryside, Giuseppe Barbera decided to escape his hometown and try to make it big in America. Like most immigrants at the time, he wasn't exactly doing it legally. He made the trip over with a fake passport, and once he arrived in New York City, he took up a job working for a local crime boss, working for the Genovese crime family. He started off as a small-time hustler. This meant that he was in charge of gambling, extortion, loan sharking, and any other illegal activity that could bring in a few extra dollars. In fact, the first thing he did when he arrived in the city was place a bet on a racehorse. As soon as his horse crossed the line, cops closed in on him and arrested him for illegal betting. But since he had no criminal record, they let him go with a warning, and he got away with his winnings. He used that money to buy his mother a house back in Italy and set up shop as a small-time hustler in Little Italy. It wasn't long before he caught the attention of the local police. He was arrested several times on charges of illegal possession of weapons, illegal betting, extortion, and grand larceny. But every time he was able to convince his lawyer to get his charges reduced or completely dropped. This wasn't because he was a good lawyer. There were just not many laws against what he was doing at the time. In fact, when he was arrested for selling moonshine during the Great Depression, the judge actually gave him 60 days to report to jail. He also made enemies. During one robbery, he was shot in the shoulder, and another time he was jumped by 3 men while he was collecting protection money. Thankfully, he was able to fight them off and make it out alive. And there was one time when he and his crew robbed a grocery store and accidentally killed the owner. He managed to talk the cops out of arresting him for murder, but he did end up serving some time for manslaughter. But still, despite all the close calls and run-ins with the law, he managed to build up a criminal empire on the streets of New York City. When World War II broke out, he and his crew were given immunity from prosecution and even funding from the U.S. government. This was because they had connections, too, to fascist Italy. After the war ended, they were supposed to be arrested. But by that time, Giuseppe Barbera had become a key witness in a massive racketeering case against the Genovese crime family. So the government decided to protect him instead of prosecute him. And that's when things really took off for Joe Barbera. Now, running as a made man in the Genovese crime family, he spent the next few decades climbing the ranks and getting rich. He ran illegal gambling rings, construction companies, waterfront operations, labor unions, and anything else that could make him a profit. For example, he was involved in the lucrative business of buying stolen goods and reselling them throughout the East Coast. Since he was half Italian and half American, he was able to work both sides of the law. If the police ever suspected him of a crime, he could use his connections in Italy to claim citizenship and avoid prosecution. And if any mobsters from Italy tried to set up shop in America, he helped them navigate the American legal system and get their criminal enterprises up and running. In fact, he was known as the most honest mobster in America. Despite being a ruthless businessman who would order hits on anyone who crossed him, he never betrayed the trust of people outside the Mafia. To this day, there are rumors that he was the real-life inspiration for the character of Tom Hagen in The Godfather. However, he wasn't just smart, he was also violent. He was directly responsible for dozens of deaths and was suspected in hundreds more. At one point, he ordered a hit on a rival mobster, but the target survived and launched a gang war between the two families. This lasted for years and resulted in dozens of dead bodies turning up in the streets of New York City. As the war raged on, however, Giuseppe Barbera kept coming out on top. He continued to expand his criminal enterprise, moving into narcotics trafficking, illegal labor unions, arson, gambling, money laundering, and contract killing. By the late 1970s, he was considered to be one of the most powerful mobsters in the country. So when the boss of the Genovese crime family went to prison, he stepped in to take his place. It didn't take long for him to become the official boss. He maintained his position until 1986, when he was indicted on racketeering charges. Now, up until this point, the government had turned a blind eye to most of his activities. In fact, they had actively protected him on several occasions. But everything changed in 1985 when a former associate of his named Michael Francesi took the stand as a government witness. He testified against Joe Barbera in a massive racketeering trial, and the feds brought the hammer down. Barbera was found guilty and sentenced to 100 years in prison. He appealed the decision, but it stood. While appealing, he was sent to the ADX Florence, which is one of the most secure prisons in America. He spent the rest of his life there until he died of natural causes at the age of 85. Today, the Genovese crime family is still one of the 5 major families of the Mafia in the United States. They are involved in every type of criminal activity you can think of, from drug trafficking to murder for hire. Just recently, the current boss of the family, Matthew Madonna, was arrested on extortion charges. But even though the family is still active today, they are a shell of their former selves. The government has been taking them down for decades, and the arrests keep piling up. In fact, the family has been completely decimated by the efforts of one man, a man named Donnie Brasco. If you don't know the story of Donnie Brasco, then we have an entire video dedicated to his insane story available now. Now, since the name Barbera means Redbeard in Italian, let's look at a couple other crime bosses with red beards. Take a look at this guy, for example. This is Vincenzo LaCorte. He's the boss of the Sicilian Mafia. He took over the family in 2004 when the previous boss was sentenced to 26 years in prison. Vincenzo himself had been arrested in 1993 on drug trafficking charges, but he was later acquitted. However, everyone in the community knew that he was the boss. The police just didn't have enough evidence to prove it, so they kept arresting him on lesser charges. This included illegal possession of weapons, illegal possession of explosives, and conspiracy to commit murder. Finally, in 2014, he was convicted of mafia association and sentenced to 6 years in prison. He only served 4, but he was released directly into house arrest, where he remains to this day. Or how about this guy? Vito Genovese is considered to be one of the most ruthless mobsters of all time. Led the namesake Genovese crime family and was personally responsible for hundreds of deaths. He got his start working for Giuseppe Barbera, who we covered in this video, eventually became the underboss of the family. When the boss went to prison, Vito took over and wasted no time cementing his power. He launched a gang war against the rival Colombo crime family, which resulted in dozens of dead bodies being dumped in the streets of Manhattan. At the height of his power, he was arrested and sentenced to 15 years in prison. He was released early in 1957 and resumed his criminal activities. But he died of a heart attack just 2 years later at the age of 59. Or what about this guy? This is Matteo Messina Denaro, the boss of the Sicilian Mafia. He took over the family in 2006 after the previous boss, Bernardo Provenzano, was arrested. Matteo is one of the richest criminals in the world and is said to have a personal fortune of $1.2 billion. He made most of his money through extortion, kidnapping, and drug trafficking. The police have been after him for decades, but he's always managed to stay one step ahead. That is, until recently. On May 14, 2023, he was finally arrested and sentenced to life in prison. Thanks for watching.